I've spent 30 odd years in this career and become increasingly troubled, I suppose, by ultimately being a demand generator. People just buying stuff and then buying more and then buying more and then buying more. I'm very deliberately working with universities, researchers, and university spin-outs because I wanted to, when I eventually pack in or shuffle off this more coil, I'd like to leave it in a better place than I have. And the way I thought I could have the biggest impact is to help the really smart people get their message out and communicate better and all that kind of stuff. So I'm lucky to have been working with a bunch of universities, some incredibly smart researchers in quantum physics and all kinds of really, really interesting stuff, which is massively more taxing than selling a new BMW. One of the subjects that came across as working with Loughborough University, I was looking at a whole range of stories about research and things that were going on at the university. And amongst this sort of sheaves of paper of stuff, this thing, digital decarbonisation, popped out. Well, I kind of wasn't familiar with the phrase at all. And then I read probably 2 or 3 lines and was dumbstruck and thought, my God, why is nobody talking about this? 65% of the data that sits on servers in server centers around the world, consuming vast quantities of CO2, of energy and producing CO2. 65% of that data is called dark data. It gets used once or never at all, and it just sits there and continues to accumulate. And as we know, with the increasing use of digital in every sector, in every sphere of life, the whole Internet of Things, you can have your kettle understanding your biometrics or something before too long. Where does this thing end? So this really hit me hard. So I think I'll leave it there and pass over to Graham, who can give a brief introduction about himself, as he comes from the creative industry as well. And then maybe Graham can really take you into the hidden depths of digital decarbonisation.
Great to be here. So what I'm going to talk about, and I'll share my screen now, is digital decarbonisation and how it relates to the creative industries specifically. So let's have a look at the creative industries. So to start with, look at the creative industry's carbon footprint. The creative industries in its analog phase, as well, let's call it analog, are pretty big polluters. But we're in this sort of strange sort of paradox at the moment, I think, where the creative industries are driving digital adoption across a whole number of sectors. But actually what it's doing is creating new pressures with the use of data farms, server farms and streaming. And what the digital decarbonisation team at Loughborough Business School has been doing is starting to chart for the first time what the impact of digital is on our environment in a way that I think has become quite a surprise for a lot of people. So Spotify says that it's got a carbon footprint of 353,000 tons of CO2. Now that's greater than music festivals in the UK, where you might say, well, that's global, yeah? But 42% of that is from listeners streaming. So the streaming services are a really important impact. Now let's have a look at this. So what you've got in the image on the right is 1 minute of every day. You've got Twitter users, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, massive explosion. And we know what that is, that massive explosion of social media. But then you've also got things like Netflix, which are actually central. They are the platforms through which those films and TV productions that we're referring to a moment ago are delivered. But actually, all of that combined actually creates a global greenhouse gas emission that is greater than the aviation industry. So this notion that somehow moving to digital might somehow reduce the carbon footprint of the creative industries is a myth. actually we risk making it even worse. So that 2025 figure here is about where we are at the moment. This is the explosion in data creation that we're at the beginning of, we're at the early stage of. And, you know, we're a research team. We're not a campaigning organization. We're a research team that are trying to quantify the impact, the potential impacts that that data usage can have on subsectors, in order that we can get a dialogue going about the potential for changing things before things get worse. If we don't do that, on the right-hand side, you know, we're on the route to climate hell. But actually, there are some things we could do. If I look at this one on the left is most significant for me. At the moment, the way in which we're measuring that doesn't actually capture the data impact. So while we're reducing, as you know, to take the music industry or the film industry or whatever, we're clamping down on those analog methods and analog systems, and we're patting ourselves on the back that we're reducing the carbon footprint. We risk pushing a massive uptick on the other side, which we're just not seeing. I love Ian's phrase of demand generation. You know, you're in the business of demand generation. That's what you do. I don't want to sound like I don't know, soothsayer or bad news teller that says, you know, we're just at the beginning of a very bad journey and things are going to get worse. Because I think the brilliant opportunity, I think, with the advertising and design sectors is actually you are storytellers. And what we need is some bloody good stories in order to try and change behaviors. So there's a really critical role, yes, in your own businesses and your own practices, but what's the role that you can do to help drive sustainable adoption of digital technologies? Because they're not going to go away and there will be increase in digital adoption. But how do we make sure that people do that intelligently?
You know, you're absolutely right that this has been a hidden problem, because when Ian mentioned it in last week's session, it was completely new news to me, as well as being genuinely alarming, that dark data is already responsible for more CO2 emissions than the aviation industry, for example. So, I mean, you know, across the Google display network, it is criminal that actually the average click-through rate is 0.05%. In other words, only one in any 5,000 ads is going to get noticed. And all of that is data. And so, I mean, the point is that I'd never really understood, you know, that as being, if you like, you know, carbonized.
You know, a lot of people we talk to, the assumption is, oh, we'll do it digital and that way it reduces the carbon footprint. What we're trying to say is, no, actually, you know, be aware of exactly what you're just saying. A, it doesn't reduce the carbon footprint, it could make it worse. And B, particularly in the advertising sector, as you've just set out, Patrick, there's this, you know, huge wastage, even more wastage, because there's a whole load of advertising that just doesn't get seen.
I don't know where this goes at all, but you know, it makes me think that in the conversation about effectiveness and the role of creativity, etc., the long and the short, and all these conversations, that there's a story in there that ineffective advertising is a climate crime.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It is a shockingly provocative thing to think about.
It's really
and changes the nature of the conversation in a way, I think, that would resonate with the creative industries, because we all want the work to succeed, and we all want to sell creativity and originality and cut through ideas, rather than the 99% of shit that we see go out the door most of the time.
Ian and Graham, have you talked about tiny things that can be done every single day by every single person, every agency? You know, one of the things that breaks my heart is when you walk through the City of London and every single bloody light is on, you know, and that's just not right. And I was just wondering if there's you know, creative ways of helping the creative industry do smaller things, because sometimes it just seems too overwhelming. If we could ask people who see banner ads to actually switch the ad itself to dark mode, for example, it reduces its carbon footprint by 17%, just like that.
And I think I'm suffering even now, you know, brain swirling with that sense of how overwhelming it is.
When we discussed it, it was like, we can't fret about things that are out of our control. So let's concentrate the things that are potentially within our control.
It's mind-blowing, you know, what we've seen here, and people are griping about what's the carbon footprint of Taylor Swift's jet travel, right? This is a bigger issue.